All right. Hey, everybody. It's fantastic to see
Hello,
you
hello.
coming in. Please go ahead and pop yourself on mute just because we've got a lot of people, but we wanted to make sure that we had the capacity to do breakouts. So what that means is any unmuted mics create mayhem. So please let's, and in fact, Lucas, if you can do a mass mute, that's perfect. It's not that we don't want you to hear your voices. We want you to find your voices, just not all at once and on this thing. All right, so I think that everybody is in. So let's just, first of all, welcome you to 2023 Hedonic Calendaring Workshop. This is something we just wanted to do on behalf of our extended community, and that's you guys. So we will be rolling this out more broadly to kind of the world at large, as well as this is the core kind of IP or curriculum backbone to our new course, Flow Performance 3.0, that we are launching this year. So we wanted to give you guys kind of a sneak preview, as well as kind of the updates and our latest findings. So with that, let's jump straight in. I can see David, it's good to see you from Byron Bay, my man. Fantastic for people to jump in from all over the world. And let's get cracking. So the first thing is just the simple request for road rules. We're in this together. This is a live experience. This is not a recorded pseudo live webinar or anything like that. We're all in the same place virtually at the same time. So do yourself and do us a favor. Let's mute and silence phones. Let's turn off blinkers, buzzers, and notifications, and then have something to write and reflect with, so that rather than this just being a barrage of information, we're actually getting getting some both thoughts and ideas, but also actions for everybody going forward. And then Lucas, if you have the capacity just to check audio, if for everyone, please just go ahead and hit the mute button in the bottom left. And it might be especially tricky if somebody is on a phone and doesn't necessarily have as obvious access to their taskbar. But yes, please make sure that you are actively muted and we can get cracking.
So everyone shows up as auto muted. So if you pop off mute, that would be a manual thing. So actually, you might not have to touch anything at all.
Okay, and then and so Lucas, if you can just pop the link to the Google Doc, we are sharing with you guys a template that will allow you. You can, if you want to write by hand, we encourage that. But if part of your brain is like, I want to make sure I get it all right, or have it cleanly in the right place, in the right order, that there is the link for you guys. So please feel free to go ahead and click on that, open it, save it as your own. Just change the title or put your initials at the end, and then resave it, and then you will have that, and we can get cracking from there. Okay. So that's kind of sort of our just basic housekeeping. You should have your templates. We will be going through every single step as a group, but that will be yours to reflect on and go forwards with. So we're going to break our time together into 3 chunks. So the first chunk is fundamentally just some introduction to some ideas and some kind of higher level concepts. The middle, the meat of it, will be the actual overview of hedonic calendaring. We won't be going into all the nuts and bolts because that takes several installations, but we're going to give you the high level overview, and then we're going to drill in and focus on a very specific, hopefully most helpful part for most people. And then we're also going to just share with you a little bit more information about Flow Performance 3.0, which, as I said, this hedonic calendaring content lives inside and is kind of the core engine of. So with that, let's get cracking. So first of all, let's just define some terms, because obviously this is January, and in January, everybody and their mother comes out of the woodwork and starts talking about, well, I mean, what do they call it? It's not, they don't call it sober January. It's got to be something that rhymes, but there's something that rhymes with like going straight in January. There's New Year, New You, there's New Year's resolutions. There's why New Year's resolutions aren't any good. There's why they are good. There's the whole bit. Dry. Fantastic. Exactly. Dry January. That doesn't sound very fun. So there's all those ideas, right? And we just want to say that what hedonic calendaring is and isn't, it's not those things. But what it is it's a way to put a little bit of intentionality around how the year ahead unfolds, and to try and strike the balance between structure and freedom. And we'll go into much more detail as to why that's helpful and what that does for us. But that's the basic idea. Once again, mute folks, we're hearing some rustles. So the next bit is, as I said, it's not vision boards, it's not New Year's resolutions, and this isn't even actually goal setting, although if you follow through on it, you will have a higher likelihood of achieving more of your goals. And then lastly, it is what the real intention of this is for us to be able to kind of create what Bill Torbett at Boston College, he's one of the kind of leading adult developmental theorists. So he did his doc work at Yale, and he's taught at SMU and other places, what he would call a liberating structure. And liberating structures are structures that support us but don't constrain us. You know, and one of the simplest examples would be sort of training wheels for a bicycle, right? That when you're a little kid and you're going to fall into the ditch, the training wheel catches you. But when you've got your balance on two wheels, you don't even notice they're there. So think of this calendaring process, specifically hedonic calendaring, as a liberating structure, as training wheels to leave us more accident prone for the positive, the serendipitous, the graceful experiences of life, but not leaving it entirely to chance. All right. So first things first, since we're going to be talking about how to harness and integrate peak states into our day-to-day living and into our overall year and kind of the rest of our lives, it seems first important to really just check, well, where are we all coming from? And in general, we're coming from one of three places. Excuse me. We're coming from sort of typologies or personality types, that kind of a thing. And the first one is the hedonist, the second one is the conformist, and the third one is the purist. And to give you guys kind of the headline up front, what we would suggest is that each of these is true but partial. Each of these has sort of both strengths and weaknesses. And what we want you guys to be able to do is identify which one is most like you, where are your strengths and weaknesses, and then how can we combine and integrate the other two into what we might call truly hedonic engineering. So the first, let's just take a look at the hedonists themselves, right? So what is their core identity? Their core identity is very much, I'm the sensation seeker, right? I want to suck the marrow out of life. I'm always the one who's trying to turn it up to 11. Catchphrase, feels good, do it. But the missing link they have is brakes. They're very strong on gas. They're very strong on having more, doing more, seeking more, right? Substance use quite often, right? Intense experiences, adrenaline sports, all of those kinds of things. The Achilles heel, you know, in conjunction with missing brakes, is going too hot, too heavy, too hard. And so addiction and self-destruction can be absolutely things for hedonists to work, you know, to watch for. Their resistance, right? What is the thing that triggers them, right? Is typically that kind of, you're not the boss of me. Like no one can keep me down. No one can crimp my freedom. No one can limit my choices. No one can cramp or guilt my joy. But the core value they have is, hey, I want to live fast, die young, and leave a good looking corpse, right? I want to absolutely suck the marrow out of life. And I don't want to leave any experiences untested, untasted. Okay, so that's the hedonist, and we're going to come to a poll in a second to see where everybody stands up. The next is the conformist. And the conformist, their core identity is very much like, I am a by the booker. I do what the grown-up said. I do what the people in authority said. And specifically, their catchphrase could be, well, if it's what the doctor ordered, right? And their missing link, the thing that they, you know, could probably do with and lack, is actually steering out of the ruts of consensus opinion, right? So they're just straight down the middle. Their substances of choice, no surprise. This is just a small sampling, but Ambien, Adderall, alcohol, anything that is prescribed or legal and socially sanctioned, regardless of whether it's healthy or not, right? So there's all sorts of studies, and there's a recent study that just came out basically saying, hey, 30 years plus of putting our children who are neurologically and psychologically, you know, hyperplastic and developing on prescription amphetamines, which is Ritalin and Adderall, actually has had no positive market effect on academic performance over time. And you're like, oh shit, what have we just done to an entire generation of kids? And conformist parents, you know, with the best of intentions, marched into those doctor's office, took those prescriptions, said, little Billy or Sally, here you go, pop them every morning. And I believe in this. And then I might have trouble, taking, relaxing at night. And I have a couple of drinks, it's wine o'clock, right? Or a couple of glasses of whiskey. And because my sleep is disrupted, think nothing of Ambien, which, by the way, is a bizarre chemical, which radically disrupts natural circadian rhythms and sleep cycles, and even has the closest molecular chemical comparison to ibogaine, that's curious West African root. So Ambien is a bizarre substance, and people pop that stuff like candy. My wife and I were at a dinner party a couple of years ago, and the conversation just steered around I don't know how it got to that, but basically we were the only two at the table that didn't routinely take sleep aids, and I was boggled by that. Right at the same time that those folks might blanch at someone passing around edibles or cannabis after dinner or something else like that, right? So their Achilles heel is compliance at all costs, whether or not the information, and obviously, yes, you can read into this. We're not going to touch the third rail of vaccinations, but you can 1,000,000% read into different personality types and what their reactions might have been to the last few years of public health decisions, right? And their resistance is, well, what if I steered outside what the experts said? What if I went beyond the pale of social norms and conformity? It would be, well, who would I be? I would be like those folks. I would be somebody, right, that I don't identify with. And their core value, though, is solid. I value the advice of the experts. So the next one is the purist. And the purist is very straightforward, right? The purist here is their core identity is to protect their identity, right? Their catchphrase would sort of be, my body is my temple. There's often quite a bit of pride involved in that cultivated identity. And their missing link is typically gas or the accelerator, right? Whether it's yoga or meditation or breath work or prayer or whatever it might be, they have tended to conclude that their life practices give them everything they could possibly need. In fact, I just saw a Neil deGrasse Tyson short with Joe Rogan, and Joe was trying to talk to Neil about psychedelics. And Neil was like, I've never done them and I don't need them. And here's why. The human brain barely works as it is. And I have no desire to alter my own sense of thinking. And Joe was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. Are you sure? Are you sure you're sure? Right. And that's a very consistent kind of response from the purist. And you can obviously see their substances of choice. Their Achilles heel, as we said, is typically pride. They have a carefully constructed and burnished self-identity, and they get mileage out of that, right? And the resistance, and when I wrote about this in Stealing Fire, is the sort of the pale of the body, the idea that what I do myself is real and true, and anything external or exogenous to myself is somehow a shortcut or cheating. But the value they hold is legit, which is I value the sanctity of my mind and body. So if you can kind of look at these and just see which ones pop for you, which ones pop for friends or family members, spouses, partners, kids, any of those things, you can just kind of see how we all show up across this spectrum. And if you look at the core values at the bottom, you're like, oh, wait, what if we could combine these? What if there was a way to say, hey, let's suck the marrow out of life? We are only here, as far as we know, for these singular lifetimes. Even if you believe we come back, I think most folks would agree it's a pretty cold memory reboot. We kind of start back at the bottom of the slide. So these lives are the ones we've got. And experts do know stuff. And following science, following research, if anybody follows our buddy Andrew Huberman and his Huberman Labs podcast, right, it's invaluable, because he is giving us the synthesis of meta-analyses of a bunch of peer-reviewed studies, and generally only the better and more reputable studies. So the advice of experts 100% matters. And so does the sanctity of mind and body. There's no point doing anything, no matter how fun or interesting, if it ends up in a net degradation of our bodies, minds, and hearts. So that's the sort of overview, and hopefully you guys can kind of see yourselves in it. What we'd love to do now is put up the poll. So John, if you can launch the poll, which was, who are we as a collective here today, right? And how many of us fall into which camps? And I always find this fascinating to see who is both, drawn to our work, this community, and where we stack up on the spectrum. So far, it's a runaway for the hedonists. You guys are cranking along, you derelicts. We've got some purists in the mix, about 1 out of 3. So that's an even split. Conformists are unsurprisingly lagging. But let's see if we can get everybody to have a vote in. We've got 500 folks here, and we've got about almost 400 have voted so far. So if you're on the fence, pick one. And we'll give it another moment or two. All right, hedonists have crested the 50% mark. You guys are a clear Democratic majority. We'll give it another 15 seconds. This shouldn't be too hard, guys. You kind of know who you are by now, I would think. If you're fudging it, there's no judgment. There's no judgment, I promise. Like we said, everybody, each has their Achilles heel, each has their superpower, each has their core value. All right, let's go ahead and we'll share the results. So that was the final tally. About a coin toss, 50-50. Hedonists with purists coming in a solid one representative third, and then basically it seems like the missing conformists are actually hedonists. Otherwise, we would have had a third, and a third, right? So that's kind of where we are as a collective. So that's kind of fun to know. And now we can kind of keep going on what's next. So now we'd like to take that. Now we kind of have a pulse of who we are as this collective today. And we're going to engage in breakouts. We're going to break into groups of 3 and get to share just a little bit of reflections on this. So what is your primary ecstatic personality type? The hedonist, the purist, or the conformist? And then how has identifying that way, behaving that way, making your decisions, living your life that way, how has it helped you? And also how has it hurt, constrained, or limited you? And you might not have any identities for that, but I invite you to consider it. If it had constrained me or limited me or hampered me in some way, what way might that be? And then the final one is, which is the one that you have the most allergic reaction to? Presumably that's not yours, right? So those are the 3 questions. We will post them again in the chat so that you have them. But fundamentally, which personality type am I? How has it helped and hurt me in my life? And which is the other one I have the most allergic reaction to? Okay, so now we're going to break. And please say hello to everybody and just give a quick first name, last name, where you're from, and if you've done any trainings with us. So that's the quick hellos. And then we'll go around the horn for 10 minutes. In the meantime, what I'd love to invite everybody who's still here is to actually just type into the chat your answers. So what do you identify with? How has it helped and hurt? And then which is the alternate personality type that you have the most aversion or allergic reaction to? So let's kind of just jump in to those. Hedonist, burnout, and conformist. Hedonist, purist, yuck, conformist. Hedonist, purist, aversion. Well, this is actually very good because we're about to get to something that will leave all the hedonist purists feeling quite validated. So just, spoiler alert. Memoir in progress, freedom at all cost. I'm a blend of hedonist, blurry hedonists, of hedonist with purist tendencies. Conformist, the conformist, I didn't get to read more. I want to see what's happening here. Helps with safety and trusting experts. Allergic to the purists. Fantastic. Moderation in all things and all that. There's a good Grateful Dead tune, right? It takes dynamite to get me off. Too much of everything is just enough. So yes, hedonist, the exposure to addiction is obviously a clear and present danger for folks on the hedonist path. The anti-conformism, this is fantastic. I identify most with the purist. Too tempted by fun and joy, the purist hurts, idealism fails. Yeah. I mean, these are fantastic, guys. These are really interesting and also like deeply human. I mean, the idea that like, oh, wow, I have found myself on a path, probably family of origin, culture, community of faith or belief, whatever it's my profession even. I mean, obviously, if you work in the government or the military or some tight and buttoned down profession, your capacity is, you're probably going to be entrained and conditioned and reinforced to be more conformist. If you are an independent entrepreneur, if you've been doing a more kind of bohemian lifestyle, right? There's all sorts of really sweet and tender and totally logical reasons why we end up in the places that we have, right? So now let's keep going. And hopefully that this is kind of anchor that both I've shown up through my life and I've lived it in a certain way. It's had its pros and cons, and there are other options. And those other options, even and especially if I'm averse to them, if I'm triggered by them in some way, they actually have a genius, and so does my own approach. And so the question to be a hedonic engineer is, how do we combine all three of those? How do we combine seeking and valuing full throttle experience of life? How do we combining with evidence, science, research, best practices, and a really healthy respect for the sanctity of mind and body, right? So that is our definition of a hedonic engineer. Okay, this is not simply a plan to be a better hedonist. All right, so that's a key differentiation, because here's the deal, right? We know that hedonists can overheat, and we know that purists can run a little cool, right? And so it's very much the Goldilocks spread. And if you guys are familiar with any of our work and with flow science in general, that also mirrors the flow channel, right? The challenge skills equation is another Goldilocks dialectic, which is, too hard or too hot, things collapse or fail, too soft or too easy or cool, and they don't ever get to a simmer. So this is another variation of that kind of sweet spot balance seeking. So for anybody that has trained with us, you guys are familiar with this model, but we get this a lot, especially from both super aggressive and ambitious biohackers, as well as people with dedicated or aspirational spiritual practices, and for sure, for any kind of psychonauts and seekers. And the question is always sort of, well, what's the top of the mountain? What does that look like? And this came up when I was actually in presenting at Red Bull to a bunch of both elite athletes, but also like Olympic performance coaches and neuroscientists and all these kind of folks. And so I wanted to kind of use a metaphor that landed for those folks and didn't leave anybody with an allergic reaction. And to me, it's as good as I've come across, which is that in the 21st century West, right? This is not to say anything about lineage traditions, ancient past, wisdom schools around the world, but it is to say for us today now, right? You could make a case, and I'm about to, that functional enlightenment, right? The kind of high point of where do we get to isn't actually a fixed and static high point, right? It's not a specific cross-eyed, ooey gooey, sitting on a cushion, burning incense, speaking in, quiet NPR whisper talk. It's actually, hey, nothing more nor less than, can I match my state to the task at hand? And if I can do that consistently, fluidly, elegantly, and effectively, I'm a next level person. I'm actually a highly attuned, highly functional human being. And that works in three ways. The reason I pick an image like this one for anybody that motorcycles or mountain bikes, or you can even just kind of, imagine the obvious, right? If you look at that big Triple Crown front fork there, it's designed to take up a lot of really big hits. And the bigger hits it can take, the faster I can go over rougher terrain, like life, right? So that's range, right? But if I took a big hit and I didn't have springs or compression in it, that would be it. I could only take one hit and then I'd be out of bullets. So it has to have rebound. It has to have the capacity to return to center. And then if I'm going at 40 miles an hour down a big trail and I hit a huge rock and, and it compresses and then it springs back with all that fierce, violent energy that it took on the front end, it's going to buck me off that bike like a pogo stick. So I don't just need range, right, or travel. I need rebound, right, to get back to my center. But I also need dampening, which is the ability to dissipate energy and then return it in a way that doesn't disturb my balance. So if I have those three things, range, rebound, and dampening, that's effectively what a tuned bike does, then I have steer. Then I can make it through life. And if you think about that, take an example of like, I have a terrible day at work, right? I'm able to absorb it. I don't freak out at my boss or a colleague, but then I come home and I kick my dog, right? That is poor dampening, right? I've evoked, violence in the world in equal measure as it was inflicted upon me. That's no good, right? So I want to be able to take and absorb, and I want to be able to dissipate in a skillful way, and I want to be able to make my way through life steering, not just hanging on for dear life. So I hope that clicks for folks. Feel free to make any comments on that in the chat, et cetera. But that's the model that we would kind of take as foundational. Because here's the thing, right? Especially these days, if we don't have much range, not much range at all. We live in climate controlled 70 to 72 degrees. We have refrigerators with thousands of processed calories, a short walk in between commercial breaks from our couch, right? Which is bizarre. And they're all salt, sweet, and fat. They're conditioned to fire up our dopamine receptors and to create glucose spikes and hunger pangs and moorishness and all of the things, because humans never had access. The Roman soldiers' idea of that person's worth their salt was because Roman centurions were paid in salt. It's an essential mineral for anybody that farms or ranches. You know about salt licks for your animals, right? We can't get it, and it's super valuable when we do, and it tastes amazing as a result, right? And the same with fat, right? Obviously, fat is highly perishable, and before refrigeration, you had to get it on the spot or you didn't get it anyplace, right? And sweet, the same thing. The only thing you could get sweet from was pretty much honey and ripe berries, which were hyper seasonal. So you kind of realize, fructose, sucrose, sodium, fats, these are the things. And, and I wrote about in Stealing Fire, there's, the entire food industry has had aggressive chemists, tweaking and tuning all of this stuff to maximize those taste bud receptors. So the idea here is, and, if you look at most of the biohacking space these days, right? Hot and cold plunges are kind of a thing. Intermittent fasting is kind of a thing, right? Why? Because temperature range, right? Because calorie restriction, because all of these things that we're doing and we're fixating on these days are just trying to expand the range again, right? The same thing with people experimenting with psychedelics, experimenting with breathwork, experimenting with any of these, silent meditation retreats. All of this stuff is really, dopamine fast even. We're just trying to get out of Snug Harbor, this incredibly narrow deconditioned range, and just expand it more. And it's kind of this intuitive seeking, right? To get us back to a wider range of activity. Because if you look at it, and this is a bit of a complex eye chart, but if you just kind of say, you look down the left-hand column and you're like, here's all the elements, right? The sort of neurophysiological elements of being a person, right? And then you look across the top and you're like kind of simplest, pre-conventional, basically an infant, a developmental little person, right? All the way across to, conventional. This is kind of where we live, to post-conventional. Now I'm starting to bring more things online, all the way to an integrated stage. You realize, oh, wow, being stuck over here is where most of us are in 21st century normal, especially if you look at kind of cortisol, epinephrine, kind of stress and arousal chemicals, testosterone, estrogen, just baseline hormones, although for most of us, they're wildly out of whack these days due to a lot of environmental toxins and chemicals. And the question is how do we get from that? How do we expand our range, right, to include this side of the fence? And it's not, if you guys look, like most of that integrated column says elective, which basically means when useful or necessary, can I expand into those states or capacities? So this is very straightforward. And this is also why we're called the Flow Genome Project. This is the genome of flow states, of peak states, of healing, of catharsis. This is kind of the map. And when you realize that, you're like, oh, that gives us much more empowered tools, because then we don't have to buy marketing hype. We don't have to buy religious traditions or explanations. We can just say, this is how the human body and brain work. And when we play with these knobs and levers, we end up in different zones. And those zones tend to have fairly predictable subjective experiences attached to them, of joy, of inspiration, of healing, of stress, of illness, of resilience, of whatever it might be. And that really kind of puts us back in the driver's seat. So I hope that helps. And that's kind of our introduction. And just kind of for some of you that may be review, but hopefully, just if a phrase lands differently, hearing it again, I hope that's helpful. And now we're going to actually get into a little bit, both the overview and then kind of drill into the most sort of simple and essential element of the hedonic calendaring. And this is good old Billy Boy Blake, the English mystic, artist, visionary, engraver, also poet, all sorts of things. But he said the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. He has so many good quotes, but that's one of them. All right. So in a nutshell, this is what hedonic calendaring looks like. Basically, it's just saying, what do we do every day as our foundational practices? What do we do once a week? What do we do once a month? What do we do once a season? And what do we do each year? And you can loosely, I mean, this is somewhat arbitrary, but thought out bucketing. But what am I doing physically? What am I doing cognitively, intellectually? What am I doing in the realm of kind of emotional and purpose-driven, what we would call, loosely here, spirit, simply because people often say body, mind, spirit, right? But so purpose, relation, connection, understanding of self, whatever those things might be. And then this doesn't fit this schema, but we added nature, largely because we are so disconnected from nature, and a whole bunch of things, everything from sun on a regular basis, kind of cool and helpful, stars and moon, understanding where we are, understanding phases of the moon, understanding constellations, understanding, our place on a planet, right? Trees and vegetation. There's that whole forest bathing movement in Japan, just as an effort, to decrease anxiety, to regroove people, to allow people to connect, positive benefits. Water, right? There are studies that show that even just images, like whether on your wall or on your screensaver, of water has a more positive effect on soothing and regulating our nervous systems than beautiful pictures of the Grand Canyon, inspiring peaks and mountains, all of those kind of things, let alone being next to water. And then, and again, I'll probably be mentioning Andrew Huberman's work several times through this, because he's, such a thoughtful and insightful guy on this stuff. But he did research 7 years ago on eyesight, eye lines, and how when all we've got is stuff right in front of us, like screens and phones, our attention naturally goes inward and naturally becomes sort of self-focused in the immediate moment. But if you get outside and your expanded vision, it's literally like all the metaphors become true, which is, oh, I just needed to get some perspective. Oh, I just needed to think about my life or the future or whatever it might be. Sight lines, which this goes back to hunter-gatherers, right? If I see clear to the horizon, I start thinking in terms of days and weeks, aka the time it would take me to walk there, versus if I'm just stuck here, where I get up in my head and I become very present tense focused. So that's the jam. This is the kind of the big picture. And then, to make this kind of more specific, now let's kind of get out the stopwatch. Each day, we would recommend, what is the 60 minutes I spend, the 1 hour, intentionally, that is different from the rest of my life? Weekly, just 4 hours is what we would call the secular Sabbath. And for anybody that has any kind of reaction to the notion of a Sabbath in the sense of its religious connotations, just think Sabbat is the same root as sabbatical, which is what college professors get given once every 7 years, right? They're given a year off every 7 to renew, to recharge, to pursue their research, to do those kinds of things. So take your pick, right, on what your references are, but just give ourselves permission to realize that 7 days a week, nonstop, identical, is not good either. Remember, we're trying to expand the range and variation of what we do. Monthly, give yourself 24 hours. Quarterly, 48. Annually, a week. And we can, and each of those should be increasing intensity and balancing risk-reward ratios of what you're programming. Like basically your power hour, which we're going to go into the detail on, should be all good things, right? That's doing yoga, that's doing meditation, that's flossing your teeth. It's all that stuff, right? General, positive, healthy, foundational stuff. Once you start getting into the once a week through once a year, that's a sliding scale of increasingly higher risk, higher reward activities. Right, that could be, all the way to your annuals, which could be a week doing an ultra marathon or a Vipassana retreat or going someplace like Burning Man or doing some global travel adventure or whatever it might be, right? High risk, high reward. And then you can fill in the blanks, right, as you go in between. So that's the high level of what are the buckets that we play with in the hedonic calendaring. This is what actually we would recommend as far as how do I take 1/24th of my day, 1 hour out of 24, which if you do the maths ends up being just 4%. That's it. And interestingly, when we worked with Google did some engineers on that challenge skills equation of what was the optimum to get into a flow state. And it wasn't simply right in my sweet spot. It was typically 4% harder than I have been before. So two totally different 4%, right? But I think it's fascinating to just think of that number. Do I have 4% extra willpower, time, energy, focus, commitment? Do I have 4% that I could commit to transform the rest of my life? So this is one hypothetical breakdown, right? How can I take that 60 minutes, not in one chunk? Very few of us just have an hour uninterrupted lying around, but we do have minutes here and there. And the more we can make use of these minutes, right? And we will share both this recording and this deck. So if you want to copy these down for your own learning, please do. And know that you will also have access to this. But this is our recommended suite of activities to really help. So if you guys are good now, that was just kind of our high level. What is the hedonic calendar? What are the categories we're thinking of? What are the amount of time commitments as we go through 12 months, right? And what is the 4% commitment day to day? Now, this is sort of almost this doesn't fit. We've added this because we've found it to be non-negotiable, which is basically, it's fair if you know our buddy Tristan Harris's work at the Center for Humane Tech and his kind of breakout Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma. You're probably familiar a little bit with, phone addictions. If you follow Johan Hari's work, he has also done TED Talks and written about this as well. But it is fair to say that very few of us actually have the same attention spans, the same habits, and the same ability to concentrate deeply, or even Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, which came out a decade ago, right? Just talking about the erosion of our attention. I know I personally have the damnedest time sitting down and reading a 400-page dense book that I care about. I want to learn the information, and I just find myself spacing. I find myself clouding out, like, whoa, what? And a number of journalists, a number of intellectuals have written these kind of almost confessional pieces in the last 5 to 10 years. They're like, I don't know what's happened. I feel like my brain is Swiss cheese, right? And what's been happening is consistent. It's been happening to all of us. So the reason we put this in is basically to say, hey, if you guys look back, and I'm not an early adopter of most things, but I did get that first iPhone, and this is a picture of Steve Jobs holding that little guy, and it had that metal silver back, and it was tiny, and there wasn't an app store yet, and there wasn't email on this thing. And I was working at a management consulting firm, and all my colleagues were still on BlackBerries, and the iPhone didn't even gear into like our corporate email exchange on Microsoft, thankfully, right? So I couldn't be on email on my phone, and there were no apps. And I think that is actually arguably the place we all should go back to. And here's how, right? So this is kind of our litmus test of how serious are you about that 4% transformation in your life, right? Because this is what we would say. We would say, just dial it back to 2007, and this is what you would do. So the first is anytime you get a buzz, an audible ping, or a little red bubble, right, showing up on your app, turn all those off. Turn them all off, right? None of them have permission to be breaking and interrupting your attention. And quite a few studies have shown we get interrupted 24 times. We get interrupted over 15 times a day, right? The average time of switching tasks between, like, I'm writing the email I meant to write, or I'm working on a hard project that I actually sat down to do, the average disruption time is 24 minutes, and we tend to lose up to or even over 40% of our productive work time to that cycle of interruptions. So consider that. The next one, this will piss off a lot of people, but it's good if it does, right? Is uninstall all your distractors: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, LinkedIn, and for me, the worst, news apps, right? But this is not, we're not being puritanical here, right? We're saying you get to keep using them all you want. We're just saying take them out of your phone and put them back on your desk. That's it. That's it. So we're not saying you have to cut off relationships. We're not saying you have to piss people off at work. We're not saying any of that. We're just saying take it out of your phone, right? And put it back on your laptop. That's it, right? Simplify your home screens. And here we get to the real kickers. Phones should never go in your bedroom. Bedrooms are for two things, and one of them is sleeping. That's it. And if you have a screen in your bedroom, seriously consider getting rid of it. Same with iPads. You know, all those studies of decrease in physical intimacy, romance, all of these things, the number one factor has simply been partners are taking screens to bed, and they are higher dopamine than erotic connection with your lover. And that's, and you know, and basically intimacy rates, and therefore all the glue that keeps relationships together is tanking just because we're bringing screens to bed, right? Alternately, have a good book, right, by your bedside, right? And the final kind of one, which is consistent with putting your phone to bed in the kitchen, right, is you don't have it to pick up first thing, and leave yourself that time of mindfulness. Leave that time to have breakfast if that's what you're doing. Leave that time to connect with family. Leave that time if you live alone or you're blessed with quiet and options for reading inspirational poems, scriptures, sacred texts, whatever you'd like to be, movement, breathwork. Just give yourself the first and last hour of your days for yourself, unmediated by digital algorithms. Okay? So like I said, this is an aside, but consider this a sort of PSA that if you got nothing out of this entire workshop or nothing out of it, any of your trainings with us ever, but you did this, your life will change. Promise. And it's crazy because all it does is rewind the clock a decade. It doesn't even, or 15 years, whatever it would be, right? And in fact, if anybody follows Jonathan Haidt's research, the NYU psychologist, right, who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind and a bunch of things. He's coming out with 2 books simultaneously right now on the impact of digital media on adolescents. And his thesis is basically, if you were an adolescent girl that came of age in the last decade, you are irreparably harmed by that process and those feedback loops. If anybody has seen a number of pundits, thought leaders, public intellectuals that you used to know, love, and admire, who have just lost their fucking minds on Twitter over the last 5 years, this is why, right? And everything from Jordan Peterson to Sam Harris to all, to Brett and Heather Weinstein, if you follow any of those kind of conversations and movements, you can see it. So the question is just the simplest is, and Jonathan Haidt's analysis was all those negative things for adolescents happened 2014, which was specifically the time when smartphones went wide on app stores. We went from 3G to 4G, and they had streaming access to Instagram, and then the progression into TikTok and everything else. And we are hardly exempt. So this is what it looks like in practice. And this is why I was saying, what a fun thing, right? We were low on conformists, but we were heavy on the hedonists, but we had a healthy whack of purists as well. And so this is what we would say. Our high level recommendation is live like a purist 6 days a week, right? You know what's best for you. We'll give you guys some recommendations as well, but fundamentally that's the jam. It's, whether that's alcohol, whether that's how my food choices, whatever it would be, my screens, all that stuff. Live like a purist 6 days a week. Live like a hedonist 1 day a week, right? And the key here is this: that hedonist day isn't the same as a cheat day for biohacking diets, if you've heard those, right? Cheat days typically mean do whatever the fuck you want, right? Be as impulsive as you want, guzzle donuts, drink beer, smoke cigarettes, whatever. We're not saying that. We are saying, actually, this is where the conformist comes in, right? Which is figure out exactly why and how, with the best evidence available, what is the pure path, and then exactly why and how you're pursuing peak state experiences 1 day a week for your Sabbath. right? So this is kind of the breakdown. And this, I hadn't thought of this until somebody asked us. And I was like, yeah, we're actually Boy Scouts, but some people think we're total derelicts. Why is that? And it was like, oh, because we don't shy away from the hedonist, menu. But in general, we're banging purists all the time. And this is the kind of synthesis. Most people that pursue the hedonistic path tend to go off the rails, right? And lack of breaks, right? And they tend to just go on these undifferentiated searching practices. If you ever hear somebody be like, well, when I began my medicine journey, and they go bit bopping around the world, they go to every festival they can find, they blow up their relationships and explore non-conventional relational form. They do it all, right? And they do it all in a very unstructured way. But this is actually one of the best and simplest checks and balances for that. So that's the high level. And we also just did the PSA. And also, I just want you to check, did anybody be like, oh, screw you, man. You can take my phone, you pry it from my cold dead hands. Like, no, I need this, or that's not reasonable for me. Just note, if there was any resistance in hearing that, or if you were like, yep, totally agree, I've heard all that before, but we still haven't done anything about it. So either straight up reactivity, you're not the boss of me, right? Or I've already heard that, but it hasn't changed my behaviors yet. So just notice that, right? So what I wanted to be able to do for this next several slides is try and boil down everything that is showing up in the fields of personal optimization, biohacking, et cetera, and try and get, there's that great quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the Supreme Court Justice, where he's like, I don't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I give my life for the simplicity on the other side, right? And right now, if you go online, if you have a social feed, if you're listening to podcasts, et cetera, it's kind of overwhelming. We're just stuck in the complexity. And everybody goes into the complexity and they're telling and selling a story about how all the other people are wrong, they're right if you buy their thing or do their product, et cetera. And then you're just ready to do that. And then you're like, oh shit, is it gluten I'm supposed to be avoiding? Or is it vegetables? Because vegetables have these lectins and they've been trying to kill me. Is it red meats that are really bad? Or should I be doing a blue zone diet? Or is it fish I need to be eating more? Or is it butter in my coffee? And at some point, right, we get so, it gets crazy making. And then sooner are we ready to do something that we then hear, something that contradicts it directly, that we sort of end up, we just kind of give up and we go back to whatever our instinctive, impulsive habits were. So some simple things, right? This is just going to be a few slides in a row of kind of what are some bottom line questions, hopefully on the other side of the complexity. So the first, and this is much more true around the world than it is in America, but we would basically say with alcohol, ethanol is straight up a poison, it's a toxin, and the buzz or inebriation is just early stages of alcohol poisoning. And if you hear but a glass of red wine every day, even that is deeply questionable. And of course, everybody wanted it to be true, right? But it is actually less true than that initial research might have suggested. So if we can just say, hey, ethanol it's a known toxin. And there's the paradox that it is one of the central cultural rituals that we have. Raising a glass, right? Happy hours, it's a sign of trust in business. It's a sign of, lowering inhibitions in dating. It's a time of family and celebration. It marks occasions. That's a huge reason why anybody who's had, addiction problems or issues with alcohol struggle so much. There's for sure the chemical reactions and triggers, but there's also the social context. So how do we understand that and then still make use of it? So what we would say is go high and go low. Right? Go low, meaning small amounts to learn to cook with. If anybody's ever engaged in herbal essences or remedies or anything like that, they are always in tinctures of alcohol. Alcohol is amazing for holding delicate flavors and scents, right? So do like the French, right? Cook with wine, right? Cook with brandy, with rum, with Kahlua, Grand Marnier, take your pick. Use alcohol as an amazing seasoning and taste additive to the foods we eat. And at the same time, consider really, refined, quite often high dollar, right, or high cost, gorgeous amounts of your premium liquor, alcohol of choice. So whether that's a beautiful bottle of wine, whether that's a really refined tequila or mezcal or gin or vodka, give yourself permission to only enjoy the very best in smaller quantity, right? The place we're trying to avoid is the middle, where you're using alcohol as your primary intoxicant. That is a no-go zone. And if you find yourself there, there's no blame. There's all the cultural reinforcements that make that happen. I mean, I was at the largest psychedelic conference in the world. It was in New York City. And bizarrely, given the subject matter, I was like, I haven't drunk this much in ages and I don't like it. And it was simply because it was happy hours, it was gatherings, it was these kinds of things. And not everybody's going to be engaging in long-acting psychedelics at that time. So we were drinking alcohol. And it was just so ironic, right? That was the situation. And if that's the situation there, go to a sports bar, go to a business conference, go to anywhere more sort of mainstream, and you know that that's the situation, right? So my recommendation is just consider having a simple, clear drink. Clear liquors are better than brown ones, right? So that's basically the vodkas, the gins, the tequilas are going to be easier to metabolize with less sort of byproducts in them than the whiskeys, et cetera. But if you're into whiskey, go single malt, go something beautiful and aged, sip it and enjoy it, right? And then the other is that beers are typically bottom of the barrel. Both for excessive calories as well as glycemic spikes, and other elements. So wines, surprisingly, even though they started as grape juice, are actually kind of in that happy middle. So sort of clear liquors will probably be the least impacting, then wines, then brown liquors, then beers. So you can just kind of take that for what it is. All right. Next. Now, this is hopefully interesting and mildly curious. And again, permission to have a reaction, but just hear me out, right? So this advice came from, again, Andrew Huberman. This was years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago when we were chatting. And he just was basically stumping for the nootropic benefits of nicotine in judicious measure. So we know that combusting or burning tobacco and inhaling it, whether cigars, pipes, cigarettes, no bueno, or dips, right? Mouth cancer, lung cancer, all of those kind of things. So known and established contraindication for excessive, repetitive consumption of flammable tobacco. But that said, nicotine directly stimulates acetylcholine receptors. It enhances short-term memory making, cognition, and focus. And because of that, I actually used Lucy is a current kind of snazzy brand. Nicorette is one that everybody knows from like smoking cessation and that kind of thing. But basically, I followed his advice and I took a pair of Bose noise canceling headphones, a pint of organic coffee in the morning, and 2 milligrams of Lucy nicotine gum, and that's what I used to write my last book, Recapture the Rapture. And I was able in 5 months to write 120,000 words, which is basically 2 books. And I did it, and I put on Brain FM, which is a brain entrainment soundscape in those noise canceling headphones, and I would just disappear for 3 to 4 hours. But then interestingly, I noticed that the functional medicine doctor who I've been working with in Austin just chomping on nicotine gum all the time, chomping on it, like hanging out socially, like pow, 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 going through three pieces in an evening. And I'm like, whoa, bro, that doesn't sound like a performance enhancer anymore. It sounds like it's got you. So be very mindful. And for me, I just only ever used it in that exact situation. I would only ever use it when I was sitting down to write, or I was on a high consequence, super focused podcast. I would never use it kind of casually or repetitively, and definitely never more than once a day. So that's one, is performance enhancing nootropic. Nicotine beats the living shit out of almost anything you see in the supplements and supplements and nootropic stacks and various stuff. It's one of the top. So consider, or at least reconsider, what would it be like for me to use that judiciously in a structured way, right? Alternately is, how do we re-sanctify our relationship to tobacco? Right, because it's not until Jamestown, it's not until the European colonists that the noxious weed, as they called it, made its way back to Europe, ripped out of indigenous sacred context, and then became this habituated use negative experience. There aren't really a whole lot of examples in the ethnographic literature, right, of pre-Columbian situations where you have stories or tales of First Nations folks just sitting around puffing top all day. Right? That's not how it was used. And consistently through the Western Hemisphere, where it came from, most tribes refer to tobacco, they put it at the top of the stack, even above other stronger acting shamanic medicines, as direct link to contemplation, to ancestors, to spirit realm, to insight, to reflection, etc. And Robert Graves, who was the poet laureate of England, so he was kind of basically what Joseph Campbell wanted to be, Robert Graves was. And he wrote a story where all the elders on this magical island at sunset, once a week, precisely, would hand roll and smoke a cigarette, right? Smoke tobacco. And we were with a Diné Navajo elder, and she would say that even she, in fact, my advisor in graduate school was a Lakota elder as well, and he would even take like Marlboro Reds, and he just bust them open and then pray with Marlboro Reds. And I was like this naive, idealistic hippie kid, and I was like, "What are you doing, Marlboro Reds? They're terrible." And there he would, he'd re-sanctify it. And this Diné elder woman would say, you know, she travels the world, she's a wise woman, everybody is always coming up to her, giving her organic, God, you know, hand-grown stuff, and she's like, "I love it, and I'm super appreciative of it, but I also like to go and get a pack of drum, you know, or some other commercial behind the gas station counter tobacco. And then I open and I say, hello, you know, spirit of the plant. Like, I still see you. Like, we're going to do good things together, right? Like, I'm going to reconnect to the intention and then mend and heal self, others, land, you know, any of those things through that. So that's entirely optional. That might be off the, you know, proverbial reservation for you, but consider it, right? Consider it. Now, cannabis. And I think we might even have an excerpt from the last book I wrote, which is this really fun exploration of the endocannabinoid system in humans. It's basically as powerful as our vagal nerve and vagal system. It's one of the central metronomes for how our bodies work, how we heal, stem cell growth, mother-child bonding, TBI, brain injuries, chronic memory extinction from traumatic events. Our endocannabinoid system is essential. And through a fluke of botany and human culture, this little five-fingered plant called cannabis happens to fit lock and key into those receptor sites. The same way that the milk of the poppy, right, opium, fits lock and key into our endorphin systems, right? But cannabis is not our endocannabinoid system, but it's why it has so many powerful and far-ranging effects, okay? So what I would encourage here is if you're using it more than once a week, let's say, right, you should probably back off, because it is basically, in fact, one of the leading researchers was like, basically, it's like a cannon compared to a squirt gun. Like if our natural anandamide, which is our self-developed cannabinoid, right, it's called the bliss molecule, gets just overwhelmed by external cannabis. So if you're using it more than once a week, you're probably using it, you're basically flatlining your ability, your body's natural ability to produce this stuff, right? And you should probably back off, right? If you're only an occasional user, consider understanding the entire variety, right, of ingestion methods and fundamentally balances and blends, because it's again, the same way nicotine is a sort of stealth supernootropic, and we tend to underutilize it. Cannabinoids have a wide range of highly useful and helpful things. And if you're not aware of them, they're legal and available in 38 states. Consider looking into it and look into what's possible, because if you know, smoking is the old school way. There are edibles, there are tinctures, there are sublingual, you know, almost breath mints. There's 1,000 different ways, and each has different mechanisms of action. And when you're not just inhaling it, but you're ingesting it, it goes through the liver and it gets processed not just by the CB1 receptor, but also the CB2, and it has a very different series of effects. So people who are only, you know, California sober and or overly relying on psychedelics, for instance, or other stuff, I would say just back way off and get much more conversant in the entire spectrum of THC and CBDs, as well as different methods of ingestion, because they actually go through different pathways and have different effects. And then for somebody, we alluded to this earlier with the alcohol, right? For someone whose predominant method of state shifting is alcohol, seriously consider, what would it be like for me to either substitute, well, fundamentally substitute or supplement alcohol consumption with judicious THC, CBD use, and quite specifically 5 to 10 milligrams of an edible in the cannabis, in the CBD THC blend, will typically give you, depending on your body weight, your own metabolism, et cetera, something comparable to a couple of drink buzz. And then if you like to drink, again, social norms, all those kind of things, you want to add one drink on top of that. Now you've kind of diversified your buzz portfolio, and your body will thank you. Your hangovers are negligible to non-existent, right? And you will have arguably an even nicer buzz. You will be more activated across a broader range of your cognition and awareness, and your body loading is distributed so that you don't have the negative effect. So just consider, again, if you are using alcohol as a primary or even strong secondary state shifting tool, think of different ways and additional ways to get off that bus without having to kind of deny it, shut it down, and cut yourself out of fun conversations, connections with others, and social and cultural rituals. Okay. And then finally, caffeine. So this one is kind of interesting, but we would basically say the simplest is don't have it when you first wake up. You have a natural cortisol spike, which is part of what is waking us up in the morning, and double tapping on that is basically just, kind of over cranking the system, and it's not optimal for your best bang for your buck. Alternately, if the half-life of a cup of coffee is 6 hours, which means the quarter life is 12 hours. And most of us don't just drink little 8-ounce cups. I don't know if you guys have gone to restaurants or diners and you're like, I'll have a cup of coffee, please. And they're like, sure, honey. And they pour you like this little shrinky dink. You're like, oh, honey, you're going to just need to leave the pot. Like, that's not enough. That's not adequate, right? Starbucks, we're all conditioned at this point to, probably 12 to 16 ounces, somewhere in there, right, is what we now think of as a cup. So let's just say a pint, right? 2 cups, 2 8-ounce cups is 16. Right? And give ourselves permission to have it well, not first thing, but no later than 10 a.m. Because if the 12-hour quarter life would be the equivalent of me having a 4-ounce cup of coffee right before I went to bed. And no one in their right mind would do that. So that kind of gives us our window, right? 9 to 10 a.m. is kind of a sweet spot. You can play with that. And if you get up super early or you get up later, that kind of thing, your call. But just know this is based on wake at 7, bed by 10, generic template. And try to avoid, the last thing you want to do is have sugar and cream in your coffee on an empty stomach. That too will create a glycemic spike, right? So the best thing to do is no sugar. And interestingly, if you put a pinch of salt in your coffee, it binds to the bitter receptors. So it actually blocks a sensation. It basically effectively makes your coffee taste smoother and sweeter. And so it can be a really interesting substitute for putting sugar, which gives you that glycemic spike. If you want to add cream, go ahead. Any kind of fats, cream, MCT, coconut oil, those kind of things, the bulletproof game or whatever other variant you've had, feel free. That can help dampen and buffer it, right? And try and avoid the post-lunch slump, caffeine, impulse snack, salty, sweet, fat kind of stuff. And we can talk about that. The super siesta is something that we teach in our courses, which is basically instead of caffeine in the afternoon, do 20 minutes of non-sleep deep rest, right? Which is, again, something you can Google. Andrew Huberman developed that basically as a westernized, medicalized term instead of yoga nidra. But there's a long-standing tradition of yoga nidra, which is effectively threshold sleep, relaxation, body scanning, and awareness, which lets your brainwave state go down from fast firing beta down into alpha, and then almost that kind of nodding off hypnagogic theta waves, right? And if you just go onto YouTube and you just Google, and if you YouTube NSDR, Andrew's stuff will come up, and he does some guided meditations through that. And basically what we would encourage is parasympathetic breathing during that time, which he leads you through, which is basically exhaling longer than the inhale. And that signals to your body, boosts vagal nerve tone, relaxes you, drops you down. And then to come out of it, do the opposite and do a breath of fire for 10 minutes, which would be basically if you're exhaling faster than you're inhaling, you start ramping up your sympathetic system. And just that little 30 minutes, if you give yourself permission to do it, it can be absolutely the equivalent of an afternoon cup of coffee without the consequences sleeping. And if you're saying or thinking, hey, that sounds fine and good, buddy, but I have a cup of coffee or I have a nice cup of tea. I mean, look, I'm English. I mourn my 4 o'clock cup of tea. So I'm right there with you. But if you say, hey, I do it, and I go to sleep just fine, you might. And it's not the early phases of your sleep cycle that get dinged. So it might give us a false sense of being able to manage caffeine in our system. What it does is it disrupts deep sleep cycles, middle of the night, the most. So just a consideration if you want to optimize our use, because the bottom line is if you're like, oh, I can't not have my coffee first thing. Well, that's a really good sign that it has you, you don't have it. And any of the performance enhancing benefits, right, are out the window. Right. So just know that. And if you want something, and again, for me, that a lot of it's just habit, consider hot water with lemon and sip it, because quite often it doesn't really, and if you've ever been camping or anything like that, right, it's less the specific thing that I have a warm mug in my hand and I'm sipping something hot. What's actually, whether it's a herbal tea, whether it's black tea, whether it's green tea, whether it's coffee, like it matters way less than we think. And the hot water plus lemon stimulates our system. It increases our peristaltic contraction, sort of gets the male moving. If you like to have a hot drink and then go to the bathroom for your morning break, that kind of stuff, all that stuff can happen. And you've just right-sized when you're taking the stimulants, because adenosine is our sleep-inducing neurochemical, right? And it builds up over the day, it clears out over the night. And when we wake up in the morning, there is no free energy. All we're doing with caffeine is just kicking the can of the adenosine buildup in our system until we experience so much we need to take a nap or fall asleep. So be mindful of it. There's no free lunches. The world doesn't, man does not run on Red Bull, right? So our energy is our energy. Our metabolic rate is how much we eat and how much sun and how much movement and how much air we take. And all caffeine does is just slide the dial back and forth a little bit on when we have times of peak awareness. So let me just pause here. That was quite a bit. How's everybody doing? Can I just have some verbal signals? Are we okay to keep going? I don't want to fire hose people. I know that like our breakouts broke. so this is a little bit more one way than we had originally planned. But I hope that this is tracking for everybody and useful, because honestly, like this is all we're doing right now is sharing. Yes, this is our professional work, but this is also super personal, right? This is like, what are we doing with our life? What are our kids doing with our life? What do we choose? God damn, this is confusing, right? So the energy for this has come from our own life and just trying to be like, okay, these are the decisions we're making, and this is why we're making these decisions. And hopefully that's helpful for other folks, either because you're in it right there with us and you're consuming all the literature and hearing all the scientists and the colleagues, or you haven't had the time, or you haven't not known where to look. And or worst of all, you're just getting bombarded on social media by a bunch of hucksters. So we're trying to kind of address all that stuff. All right. So that said, we don't need to belabor this one. Fundamentally, time and time again, I come back to the Michael Pollan basics, right? If you eat real food, mostly plants, not too much, you're going to do fine. And most of us don't do those things. So it's simpler, but harder than we might think. But if we do want to kind of give ourselves some TLDRs, the simplicity on the other side, we would say in general, minimize grains. Do you do white rice? Do you do brown rice? What about the lectins? What about that? All infinite rabbit holes. And don't freak out. If you are eating stuff, I would say in general, go with organic, at least, and minimally processed. Obviously, the presence of things like glyphosates and stuff in our farm goods is a super duper bummer. And eat more leafy greens. Folates are enormous, and they help with methylation, and they do all kinds of good stuff. So the whole eat vegetables. Now, you can supplement with something like athletic greens, right, which gets boosted on Tim Ferriss's, Rogan's podcast. Everybody's pumping athletic greens. They've got a great marketing and affiliate program. That said, they do create a fairly solid product. If you prefer something else, look, but do check the fine grain details on the back if you do it. But it is supplement with green powders or juices, because when you either put them in a Vitamix blender and blend them into smithereens, or you drink them in a little powder, all the fiber's gone. So it's still not a substitute for kale, for collard greens, for spinach, for broccoli. This stuff is amazing, and we are almost under on all of it, right? Next, this is just a really interesting tip. This doesn't mean you change your diet at all. It just thinking of the sequencing of what I eat when. right? We were with our son in Colorado. There's a famous brunch spot called Lucille's in Boulder. It's New Orleans cooking, and we love to go there. And we went there, and they make amazing beignets, right? Those powdered deep fried, little New Orleans donuts. And they also have really yummy fresh squeezed orange juice. It's just gorgeous. And normally I don't drink orange juice, but I will drink fresh squeezed. And they sat down, and I got a cup of coffee, a tall glass of fresh squeezed orange juice, and a plate of beignets. And then I ordered hollandaise eggs, or eggs benedict, right? But the eggs benedict came later than the orange juice and the beignets. So I ate those sons of bitches right away. I was like, this is really good. And then I drank my coffee, and I'm like sitting there going, oh my God. And obviously the glucose spike that I had from that was just utterly off the charts, just like fructose and sugar straight down the pipes. But if I'd reversed it, if I'd had a high fat, high protein eggs benedict first, and then eaten exactly the same stuff, my glucose spike would have been half to a third of what it was the wrong way around. And if you think about this, fiber, then fats and proteins, then carbs and sugars is basically a 3-course dinner in most cultures. Mediterranean meze, right? You start with vegetables, you start with a plate of salad, you then move on to your main course and your proteins and fats, your animal proteins or whatever else, and then you finish with something sweet for dessert. All fairly straightforward. Lots of different cultural traditions support that, but when we don't and we break that stuff ourselves, right, bad things tend to happen to our glucose. And if you have ever struggled with weight gain, or you're embarking in some high athletic performance stuff, seriously consider getting a glucose monitor and just watch for a week, for a month, what is happening to your own blood sugar as you go through your day. And nothing will give you better feedback and your own empowered reasons to change, right? If I talk at you, if you pick up a dietary book, we'll read it, we'll have all the normal resistance, we will or we won't do it, we won't stick with it, all that kind of stuff. But if you just have a glucose monitor and you're like, oh, this is what's happening to me in real time, it's an amazingly powerful form of feedback loops. Okay, so even something like eating a hard-boiled egg before a bagel in the morning. So like the idea of like thinking about putting fiber first, and that again, broccoli, chewy green, but leafy green vegetables, those kinds of things, and or fats. So basically nut butters with fruit, right? Any of those kind of combinations dampen the glucose spike and let you enjoy things with less negative benefits. That said, tropical fruits are basically just no bueno at this point. So bananas, pineapples, oranges, genetically modified, super sweet, ruby red grapefruits, even grapes, which are not tropical, but again, bred for super high fructose content. Most of those just aren't super helpful. Juices aren't like fruit juices is just a scam by big OJ to get more of their stuff sold. Not healthy, not good. Berries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, amazing. And blueberries also, a lot, they all have high content, high fiber content, high antioxidant content. So seriously consider more berries, less citrus. Okay. Next, low food chain fish, 2 to 3 times a week. That is one you could be like, oh, well, I do my fish oil capsules. And sadly, the research is bafflingly underwhelming on fish oil capsules and or, taking it as a teaspoon, that kind of stuff. And the consistent healthiest is low food chain, right? So any of the high on the food chain, the apex predators get the accumulated toxins all the way up the food stack. So tuna, marlin, swordfish, shark, you guys know the suspects, right? Those are all high in mercury, high in other stuff. The little guys down at the bottom are among the healthiest. And if you can find good, clean sardines, tins of sardines, put them on a salad, put them on a piece of toast, put lemon and cayenne, a little Parmesan, do whatever you need to do. But fish, healthy, high, rich oil fish, lower on the food chain is better. And then obviously pick wild and line caught for if you're going to have a, more, serious heartfelt meal. Like, the old Catholic thing of like Friday is fish pie day, or where McDonald's always used to do fish sandwiches on Friday. That was a religious injunction, right? But you can always be like, hey, Friday we do fish. And we're going to do either low food chain, simple stuff, or we're going to do a really beautiful, ethically caught, not fish farmed fish on Fridays. So that's just a thought. Oils, basically get rid of canola and peanut oil. extra virgin and olive are fantastic, as are grass-fed animal fats. And my dad always used to love potatoes fried in duck fat. And I was like, man, that seems like the height of decadence. And then I actually Googled duck fat, and duck fat is amazing. It's actually incredibly healthy, as are most, any cleanly raised and grown animal fats. So just check your fridge. Margarine, I would say, would also go in the not nearly as good as people once thought category. But basically consider extra virgin and avocado as your kind of main go-tos. And some of the avocados even have high smoke temperature, so you can actually fry with them and cook with them and do other stuff. But just look into that stuff and just be aware of which fats you're taking in, and arguably go with the good ones. And then the other one, because we're starting to get into what do I pick and how do I afford this in a budget, right? Because if you make all these recommendations, you're like, holy shit, if I tried to fill this shopping list at Whole Foods, I would be out like $500 a week. And that just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my family, our budgets, whatever. And that's a very real thing, right? And it's so commercial industrial food, especially animal proteins, is just a horrendous shit show. And if anybody's watched made your way through your quarantine Netflix without watching one of those animal farm documentaries, good on you. But if you did, you probably never look at conventional commercial animal protein the same way again. And it's fairly heinous. It's both heinous for the animal cruelty. It's heinous for the totally like creepy lack of nutrition. It's huge impacts on the rainforest. We know all the things, right? We know all the things, but how to change it is hard. And so what we would recommend is that, once again, look back to existing culture. The idea that, Sunday lunch or Sunday dinners used to, in most families have always been, there's kind of a special time each week. And that's the time to sort of eat high on the hog, as it were, right? A nicer cut, right? Something, and it could have been a chicken, it could have been, a cut of pork or whatever it would be, right? But like, if you are still consuming animal proteins and you like that and you value it as part of your diet, we would just say, go pescatarian or vegetarian, whatever your pick is, for the 6 days a week, and consider reinstituting. And this goes nicely with the Sabbath stack, right? Of like, how do we make one day a week more intentional, right? More loving, more community-based, no phones, no screens, blah, 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 right? And consider, and this is a way to afford it. So instead of buying meat, which we overconsume, instead of buying low quality meat 6 days, 7 days a week, consider really investing in very high quality meat once a week, right? That's more than enough to get most of our nutrients and those kind of things. It increases, and it's delightful. So that's just an invitation to consider, right? And certainly one that allows us to kind of split the difference. And then the obvious one is just this, right? Which is, all studies show that pretty much no matter what, you get the best absorption and you get the best change from investing in higher quality foods than overpriced supplements. Full stop. And when we do have our grocery bills, I'm like, that's eye-watering, I have to put that back and go with something cheaper. Strangely, for most of us, what I do in my supplement buying is in a different mental bucket or a different budget bucket. But we might be lured into spending all kinds of extra money on what's in our medicine cabinet or supplement shelf, right, than what we would have put into high quality whole foods. So just please know and give ourselves permission to be like, okay, I'm going to double down on healthy whole foods first, second, and third. And then I'm only going to engage in supplements with scientifically validated elements, probably blood testing. You shouldn't just do kind of broad brush, I'm going to take it because somebody told me I should, right? Or convinced me it was going to change my life. Like, get a blood panel and actually see what's missing for you, and then work with a doctor or a professional on that. So I hope that's okay. Is that all right? I hope that's not overwhelming. If in doubt, just go back to the Michael Pollan 101. But if you actually needed some go, no-go decisions, those are some of them. All right. So this is us just trying to boil it down. I'll have to count how many of these there are at the end. I think it's 8 or 9. Basically, boiling down best practices in easy to remember rhyming couplets. Right? So rather than feeling overwhelmed, the idea is that this gets as sort of simple and friendly and memorable as possible. So the first is, own your fucking phone. It should not own you, right? And we all have Swiss cheese for brains these days. And it's just digital Alzheimer's. So that 2007 time machine idea, like, that's your challenge. That's your challenge. So own your phone. If you do nothing else, that will change your life. First and last hour of the day, park it in the kitchen, uninstall notifications, that own it. It is just a tool, right? We are not a consumer product, and certainly our attention isn't, right? Next, deepen your sleeping. If you want 8 hours, you need to spend 9 in bed, right? So that if anybody wears an Oura ring and tracks their sleep, or a Garmin or anything else, right? Or a Fitbit, any of those kind of relatively reliable sleep trackers, you know this. But if you think you're getting 8 because you go to bed from 11 to 7, you're not, right? Add an hour. You guys know the drill, presumably at this point: cold, dark, right? No lights. I always just actually wear, I don't even wear a sleep mask. I just wear a t-shirt over my head, right? But I cannot sleep even with like smoke alarm lights, those little green lights, any of the power on buttons, they all suck. So absolute pitch blackness. If you want to or can, do blackout curtains to the extent that is energy possible in your life. And obviously air conditioning is expensive. The colder, the better, basically. I mean, 60 to 65 is ideal. 65 to 70 works. Much over 70 is hard to drop into deep sleep. Our temperature regulation is one of the key things that gets us into deep sleep. If in doubt, and for instance, cooling your whole house in a hot summer is just cost prohibitive and ecologically not something you want to do, look into the investment in some of those cooling pads. Uller is one. There's several others. You can just look up, bed cooling pads. They're not cheap, but neither is air conditioning your whole house for 3 to 6 months of hot summer. So seriously consider ways to drop your temperature. Heavy blankets is just another, it increases vagal nerve tone. It lets us feel safe and secure and helps us settle down. If you need to, our daughter's on campus and she's a swimmer. And she had, doors and windows right next to the ground floor on campus. And we actually went as far as getting her Bose noise canceling earbuds. They don't play music. All they do is play white noise. They fit very snugly in the ear canal. You can also get cotton and beeswax, just earbud plugs. The little foamy ones that you get at like Home Depot and things are generally crap, don't do much. But if I would start with like the swimmer's ear wax ones if you need them. Like if you're living in an urban area or anything else like that, you can try those. And if those absolutely don't work, consider the Bose noise canceling, right? And then screenless. Like we said, no screens in bed. And you guys have all heard this, that, blue light, circadian rhythms, all of those kinds of things. But just know it's not nothing. And at a bare ass minimum, put all of your phones and screens on. I mean, Apple, I think, has it installed now, but they all have a nighttime mode function. And it should at sunset kick over to yellow or orangey light instead of blue light. But basically, it's unmitigated blue light from our screens in our eyes after dark is the equivalent of the sunlight at high noon. So it completely jacks with our circadian rhythms. And for those of you here that were on our Canyons course this year or in prior years in Utah, right? We go out backpacking, do outdoor leadership stuff. It's fascinating because for the first few days, my ring still has a charge, so I get my sleep data, and people will constantly be like, "How'd you sleep those first night?" "I didn't sleep a wink." And I'm like, "Nah, me either." It was like weird, it was uncomfortable. There were animals, there was creepy sounds. I was getting used to my sleeping bag, whatever it would be. And then you check, and your deep sleep, suddenly your deep sleep is like 2.5 hours, 3 hours. You're like, I could have sworn I didn't sleep a wink, and this crazy little ring is telling me I got twice the deep sleep that I get at home in my own bed. You're like, what's that about? Well, what's that about is that we woke with the morning sun and we went to bed less than an hour after dark, and there wasn't a screen in sight. So, it's the most pronounced example I've ever experienced personally. But just know that that's a powerful, powerful thing. All right. And then again, seriously consider napping. Eleanor Roosevelt napped. Winston Churchill napped all the way through World War II. Andrew Huberman naps. All sorts of people nap. I nap. I'm a napper. I mean, and if you're ever engaged in absolutely high octane professional work where you're like, I have to be bringing through something that does not exist, like writing or painting or whatever it would be, you'll get a very clear feedback on when you're tapped. And when I was tapped writing a book, I couldn't push harder. I had to go and take a nap. And then I'd come back and I'd be like, okay, now I can do it again. Right. So you can't fudge our best work. You can only be absolutely energized to try it. Rise and shine is the next one. Waking, this is straightforward, but sunlight in the eyes, right, stops melatonin production, boosts our healthy morning cortisol, and resets our circadian rhythm. So just don't miss it. If you want to combine it with a dog walk, if you want to combine it with sitting out on a front porch for listening to music or listening to a podcast or doing breath work or doing a meditative practice, whatever it would be, combine it with stuff that you want to do anyway, but get the hell outside and welcome the sun every morning in whatever capacity you can. Motion is lotion. You guys know this, but move at least 15 minutes a day, right? Multiplanar just means not stuck on a Stairmaster, not stuck on a Peloton bike, pedaling in a linear direction like this, right? That stuff is next to, I mean, it's helpful in a cardio way, but it's next to useless for who we are, which is monkeys that came down out of trees, right? So multiplanar motion and movement, functional fitness, and ATG is just, ass to grass, right? Be able to squat, sit down on your heels, right? There's all sorts of evidence on indigenous cultures and non-traditional, non-Western cultures where, so mind your time. We live in what we always say is a 24/7 culture, and with artificial light and with, internet and all these things, we've kind of forgotten actually that not all hours are created equal. And so if we piss away the high value ones, and then we get stuck with the low value ones, our overall life and performance drops precipitously. So studies show that 8 to 11 a.m. we are most primed for complex cognitive, abstract, and intellectual tasks, aka the hard stuff. If I come downstairs, I don't get my sunlight, I sit drinking my early coffee, I get sucked into news apps, social media, etc. I postpone my movement, and I'm like, oh, I thought I was going to get cracking day, but now it's 10:30, right? I've just wasted 2.5 to 3 of my best hours that day, and I never get them back. So, and the same with inbound calls, the same with accepting and scheduling meetings. Defend your deep focus hours, somewhere in that 9 to noon phase, right? Ferociously. Anybody that impinges those, even because, like when you have a meeting that you're expecting, it's not just that 30 or 60-minute slot, right? It's the 30 minutes before it, it's the 30 minutes after it. It's a 3-hour miss. And if you've ever had a situation where you were waiting for a call or a meeting and it didn't happen, you're like, oh, son of a bitch, man, I just wasted 2 or 3 hours and the thing didn't even happen. Right. So defend your deep focus time ferociously and without apology. Right. Defend your sleeping time. And also know, if you've ever heard, mothers or parents be like, oh, honey, nothing good ever happens after midnight or 2 a.m. or whatever it would be, they're right. And if you think about what is the balance between what might I get up to between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. versus what could I get up to between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., right? The difference is incredible. All of our willpower is shot. We're generally browsing, snacking, munching, distracted. No, I've never done anything remarkable between 10 and 11, other than maybe be out celebrating at a fun concert or something, right? But as far as productive stuff, no way. And so if I'm staying up late, that then affects the next day, and then I get up later in the morning, I've just eroded, right, all of my prime time. So be super, super aware of your time. Not all of our hours are created equal. And when you start prioritizing, like just think of it, assign a value that my morning is 4 times as valuable, right, as my late afternoon to early evening, and then treat it accordingly. Okay. If you guys really wanted the maximum biohacker trip that I would recommend, I haven't done it yet, but I'm close to trying it, which would be, we said we were using the 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. as our rough, template here. It would be, consider 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. with an hour siesta after lunch, and have lunch be the main meal of your day, the biggest meal of your day. So go back to like Spanish, Portuguese, culture. And that is both best for digestion, best for deep sleep, right? Because you're not digesting and doing all of those things. It partitions your 2 days. Your day into 2 pieces, and gets you up even more into early time. All right. So that's the thought for anybody who wants to try it. Lean your caffeine. We've already talked about this one, right? So that's just a straight memory. Change your range. This is what we were talking about with the mountain bike fork, right? So get 2 extremes, right? Sweat and shiver, feast and fast, be celibate and engage your sexual nervous system. Hammer high intensity training and deep recovery, including super focused sleep. Be sober, right? That's the purest 6 days a week. Get absolutely twisted and shoot the moon every now and then, right? And we're expanding our range and recovery. And then finally, this piece, right, which we say often, but leave space for grace, right? Give gratitude, call up friends, mentors, former teachers, whatever it might be, give them the feedback, because again, recent studies have shown random texts from friends are having asymmetric positive effects on other people's mental health. right? And the act of giving it does great stuff for us as well. Make time for awe. And epoche is a bit of a curious term, but it's a Greek term from the skeptics, the Greek skeptic philosophers. And it was basically saying life is fundamentally unknowable at its core. So leave room for humility and the not knowing. And if anybody remembers Alan Watts's famous bit about good luck, bad luck, who knows, the Chinese farmer story, right? That's epoche. Right? It's that leave space, because everybody's so certain these days and everybody's just flaming each other and we're latching onto stuff, sort of just like flotsam and jetsam in the whitewater rapids of this crazy world. And there's way the hell too much false certainty. And if we leave room for gratitude, awe, and humble not knowing, right, then good things, including flow states, including grace, including other things, can show up for us. So I hope that tracks for everybody. This is the review of our power hour, and we're not going to be able to do our breakouts. So what I'd love to do is just have this be in the chat. So basically, having heard all these things, right? You've heard recommendations, you've heard possible structures and possibilities. We've kind of seen how this can all plug in. And what we want to offer you is, what am I going to stop doing? Having heard this introduction to content, what am I going to keep doing? What's a good thing that I'm actually doing already, right? None of us are dummies. No one is smart enough to be 100% wrong all the time, right? So what am I going to keep doing that's really important, that I value in my life? And then what's a new thing or idea? Just a single habit. Stop doing coffee first thing. All right. More intentional working on your writing. Absolutely. Coffee first thing. Stopping beer and adding Monkey 47. I must say, I mean, we had 2 different bottles of artisanal gin, and my wife Julie was like, and I mixed her a drink. She's like, this one tastes yummy. And then I made her the next one with the other, which was equally supposedly good. She's like, this one tastes like pool water. And sure enough, we drank the Monkey 47 first. All right, more range, waking up at 6, bed at 9. Productive time, no phone in bedroom, stop smoking weed every day, keep doing Pilates and breath work. Hell yes. Fantastic. Add occasional cannabis in moderation. Phone purge. Yes, yes. Absolutely. Stopping coffee. Stop feeling shame and guilt. Yeah, it doesn't get us anywhere. How about microdosing? There's always one in every crowd. Open question on microdosing. I wouldn't say it's the obvious cure-all that a lot of the boosters have said. There are start nicotine. Yeah. Again, be aware, right? Be aware what we're doing. You can be a functional morphine user and a functional cocaine user if you actually steered between the lines of staying on the healthy side of adaptation. Grow your own tobacco. All right. Schedule hedonic time. Get noise canceling headphones. Yeah, I'm not that type of like tech guy, but when our kids moved back during quarantine and I was trying to write a book in a crowded house, I was like, I have to have these. So that was my investment. Not keen on vapes. I would say there's also everything from the delivery mechanisms and lung issues to just the ease of habituation. I would say that's probably a place I wouldn't choose to go. And get your most important tasks on. Fantastic. So with that, just want you to think, okay, we've talked about how to optimize our year, right? And how to make the absolute most of that 4%, right? How do we take that 4% and turn it into something really meaningful? And if we did, day in and day out, right? What is the year ahead? What would I get to do, right? What would my inspiration look like? What would my relationships look like? What would my accomplishments look like? What would my impact in the world look like? So just to take a moment and really think that through and just think, okay, is now the time? Is this the year? Is this my life? Because life is generally never easier, and we're never younger, no matter how, old, creaky, over the hill, past it, whatever we might feel in our down moments, we're never younger than today, which is one of those bizarrely sort of destabilizing but empowering motions. So, this is what's possible, right? This is an old Taoist saying, right? On hearing of the way, right? You got 3 choices, right? The first is you hear it, it just washes over you, don't change much, right? The next is, this is the yeah, in fact, it's on hearing of the way, right? The wise ones make it their life. The mediocre ones pick it up for a little while and then set it down when the next new shiny object comes, and the fool just laughs, right? The fool does last. And if it were not so, it wouldn't be the way, right? So these are our options, right? This can just be an inspirational TED Talk, webinar, whatever you dropped in on one day. You can be like, I've taken notes. I'm down to rock this. I'm going to do it. And good luck to you, sincerely. Or consider jumping in with a crew of like-minded folks. And most research shows that if you have an accountability partner plus skin in the game, it's 300x or 3x's or 300% increases your likelihood of doing this. So this is just wanted to kind of show folks what we're up to. This is our new course, which is basically designed to conquer our attention deficit, right? And to focus. And by the way, if you've heard this, that like humans have a worse attention span than goldfish, that's an urban legend and it hasn't been proved at all. So we're just putting it here to debunk it. But the other stats I did share with you are legit, as far as like the 15 interruptions a day, the 24 minutes to return to task, the 40% loss of focus and productivity. So this is Flow Performance 3.0. We basically took our introductory and intermediate courses, plus all of this new content, which we've been sharing a little bit with you guys today, and put it into one super focused and concentrated personal peak performance training. This is basically between all of the leaders and founders of our organization. This is 34 years of work boiled down to give you guys pretty much an extension and a deepening of what we've just been discussing, which is the simplicity on the other side, practice-based, not theory-driven. Like, how do we actually change and improve our lives? So these are the things, you guys can look these over, but basically it is, how do I take that hedonic calendar? How do I fill in my daily power hour? How do I build and establish a half-day Sabbath? How do I choose and pick my annual big goals that if I look back on a year, I'm like, I did that. I'm alive. I've moved the needle, right? There's no question, no matter what else, what other hard stuff happened this year, I put points on the board of my life and then filling in betweens, right? So this is the intention. The intention is to make, these are kind of the battle-tested goals and tools and practices. And you guys can check this out when you'd like to. Obviously, the people that do this, we teach a bunch of stuff, particularly some of our more advanced, both conceptual, what's happening in the world, existential risk, applications, guide training, all of these things, and even sexual yoga of becoming, like what is intensive neurophysiology of partner practice. All of it lives on this foundation. All of it lives on the foundation of, do you have your personal game dialed so that you have the range, the resilience, and the dampening to be able to steer? So for you guys, we wanted to throw these additional bits in. If you'd like to consider joining, our first course is in March. I think, is that right, Lucas? I think it is. It's kicking off. So basically, early spring. And this is an invitation if you're curious. So if you want to basically take what we've started doing today and not just have it be knowledge or, a couple of pages in a notebook, but actually put it on the ground. Because basically what we've shown you today is, here's how to do a really good push-up. Here's how not to hurt your elbows. Here's how to keep your core tight. Here's how to do all the bits and pieces. But what we haven't done is actually do push-ups together. And so the idea here is to go from drowning in information to actually harnessing our own transformation. And so that's the invite. If you guys are curious, please feel free to jump in. I think, Lucas, somewhere in there, you might have put a link or something to click on, because this little book your interview is obviously on my screen, not yours. But there's a link, and we'll follow up in the emails. So if that's of interest, that's the jam. We want you to please remember, if you go back to any slide, remember the rhyming slide, right? The hedonic checklist of like own your phone, rise and shine, all those bits. If you just, and we put them in order. So if all you did was fix your phone, it'll change your life. If you do the fix your phone, deepen your sleeping, and rise and shine, that'll transform your life, right? And if you want to kind of add the rest, right, you'll get increasing return. But if you just like, where do I start? Start with your phone, start with your sleep, start with morning sun, right? And take it from there. So that's it from us. Thank you all so much for playing along. I wish we could have been talking more back and forth. There was so many of us that we didn't get to play that game, but know that in our actual trainings and much more intimate groups, we get to do that as well. So huge love to everybody. Thank you guys, and have a rocking 2023.